There's a story you've been told about money, not in one conversation, but in thousands of small moments, starting from childhood. It's in the way your parents talked about bills, in the way your teachers talked about careers, in the way your friends talk about prices, in the way ads talk to your insecurities, in the way society rewards certain behaviors and punishes others, often without you even noticing. And slowly, invisibly, this story becomes your operating system. You don't choose it, you inherit it. And once it's installed, it runs in the background of every financial decision you make. This is why two people with the same income can end up in completely different realities. One stays stuck, the other breaks through. It's not about luck, it's not even always about skill, it's about code. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a set of rules about what money is, what it's for, and what people like you are allowed to have. Maybe it was,
where did this come
money
from?
doesn't grow on trees.
Tell me the truth right now.
Maybe it was, rich people are greedy. Maybe it was, just be happy with what you have. Maybe it was, we can't afford that. On the surface, these sound like harmless phrases. Some even sound wise. But underneath, they're constraints. They tell your brain, don't aim too high. Don't expect too much. Don't make it about money. And the result, you start making decisions that feel safe, reasonable, responsible, but quietly keep you in the same financial place year after year. You don't realize you're following a script. You just feel like you're being practical. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people aren't poor because they lack opportunity. They're poor because they're running outdated software, programs that were never designed for wealth. Programs that were designed for survival, and survival is not the same as prosperity. Survival says, save what you can.
We did it!
Prosperity says,
the proposal
build
was
what
accepted.
can grow. Survival says, avoid risk. Prosperity says,
clearly
manage
demonstrate
risk.
the success
Survival says, money is scarce. Prosperity says, money is a tool. These aren't just different opinions. They're different operating systems.
I cannot handle this workload
and if you're
anymore.
running the
Must finish
survival
this
version,
report.
it doesn't matter how hard you work. You'll always feel like you're one step behind. Because the system you're using wasn't built to get you ahead. It was built to keep you safe. The problem is that safety in the financial world is often just another word for stagnation. You can be responsible your entire life and still end up broke. You can be careful and still miss every opportunity. You can be smart and still make the same mistakes over and over without understanding why. That's the power of programming. It doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like common sense. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because when your financial decisions feel automatic, you stop questioning them. You stop testing them. You stop imagining that there could be another way, but there is. And the first step isn't earning
This
more.
isn't enough.
It's seeing the code. Because once you see the patterns that have been running your financial life, you can start to rewrite them. Which leads to the next question. What are the specific habits, the invisible ones, that keep this program running, even when you think you're doing the right thing? There's a certain kind of financial habit that's especially dangerous, not because it's reckless, but because it feels responsible. These are the behaviors that get praised, that make you feel like you're doing the right thing, that look like discipline, maturity, wisdom, but underneath, they're quietly draining your potential. One of the most common is this: treating every dollar the same. You earn money, you pay bills, you save what's left. You tell yourself you're being smart. You avoid debt. You don't take risks. You keep everything in one place. On the surface, this looks like control. In reality, it's a lack of strategy. Because not all dollars are equal. Some are meant to be spent, some are meant to be saved, and some are meant to work. When you treat them all the same, you lose the ability to build. You end up with a savings account that grows slowly, if at all, while inflation eats away at its value. You end up with money that's safe, but going nowhere. Another subtle trap, prioritizing comfort over leverage. You choose the stable job, the predictable income, the known path. You tell yourself it's the rational choice. And in a way, it is. But rational for whom? For the version of you that wants to avoid short-term stress, not for the version of you that wants long-term freedom. Because comfort is expensive. It costs you the upside. It costs you the compounding. It costs you the years where risk would have actually paid off. And the worst part? You don't feel the cost until it's too late. There's also the habit of waiting until you can afford it. On paper, this sounds smart. Don't spend what you don't have. Don't move until you're ready. Don't jump until you see the ground. But in practice, this becomes a way to never move at all. Because you never feel ready. You never feel like you have enough. The perfect moment never comes. And while you're waiting, someone else with less money but more action is already in the game. This isn't about being reckless. It's about understanding that some things can't be afforded by waiting. Opportunities expire. Windows close. Momentum matters. Another invisible drain. Paying for status instead of assets. You buy the car that makes you look successful, the clothes that signal you've made it, the lifestyle that proves you're doing well, but none of these things produce income. None of them appreciate. None of them work for you. They work against you. Every month, they take money out of your pocket, in payments, in maintenance, in depreciation, and give you nothing back but image. And image doesn't pay bills. Then there's the habit of thinking small by default. You don't aim for the bigger number. You don't ask for the higher rate. You don't price your work at what it's worth. You settle for good enough because it feels safer, more realistic, more humble. But humility doesn't build wealth. Clarity does. When you undervalue yourself, you don't just lose money in the moment. You lose the compounding of that money over time. You lose the opportunities that come from having more capital. You lose the confidence that comes from knowing your worth. And perhaps the most insidious habit of all, avoiding financial education. You tell yourself you'll get into it later, that it's too complicated, that you'll just hire someone when you have more money. But money doesn't respond to ignorance. It responds to understanding. The people who build wealth aren't necessarily smarter. They're just more literate. They know how money moves. They know how it grows. They know how to position themselves so it flows toward them, not away. And they learn this not by accident, but by choice. These habits don't feel like mistakes. They feel like maturity, like responsibility, like being a good adult. But they're not. They're survival strategies dressed up as financial wisdom. And they keep you in a cycle of earning, spending, and staying instead of building, compounding, and breaking through. Which leads to the next layer. The habits that aren't even about spending or saving, but about how you buy the feeling of control itself. There's a pattern that shows up again and again in people who stay financially stuck, not because they're irresponsible, but because they're trying to feel safe. They make decisions that reduce anxiety in the short term, but drain opportunity in the long term. They don't see it as avoidance. They see it as being practical. But underneath, it's the same script. Trade future freedom for present comfort. One of the most common versions of this is over-optimizing small expenses while ignoring big leaks. You track every coffee. You cancel subscriptions. You hunt for discounts. You feel productive. You feel in control. Meanwhile, you're paying full price on things that actually matter. A car that depreciates too fast. A lease that locks you in. A job that caps your upside. A lifestyle that demands constant income just to maintain. You feel like you're managing money, but you're really just managing stress. And stress management is not wealth building. Another subtle trap, keeping too much in safe accounts. You tell yourself it's smart to have a big emergency fund, to keep cash in the bank, to avoid anything that could go down in value. On one level, this makes sense. You want security. You want a buffer. You want to sleep at night. But there's a cost that doesn't show up on your statement. Opportunity cost. Every dollar sitting idle is a dollar not working, not compounding, not building. Over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, this adds up to staggering amounts. You don't lose the money in a crash. You lose it in slow motion, through inaction. And because it's invisible, it feels like nothing happened. But something did. You traded potential growth for the feeling of safety. Then there's the habit of needing to understand everything before moving. You research, you read, you watch videos, you compare options, you wait for certainty. You tell yourself you're being careful, that you don't want to make a mistake. But in reality, you're using analysis as a form of avoidance. Because the truth is, you'll never have perfect information. You'll never know everything. You'll never feel 100% ready. And wealth doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It moves in imperfect ones. The people who break through aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones willing to act with partial clarity. They accept that some risk is unavoidable, and that waiting is its own kind of risk. Another hidden pattern, paying for predictability in the wrong places. You choose the fixed salary over the variable upside, the stable client over the scalable model, the known path over the uncertain one with higher potential. You tell yourself it's the mature choice, the responsible one, but often it's just fear wearing a suit, because predictability has a price, and that price is capped growth. When you optimize for certainty, you limit your exposure to the very moments where life changes. The big wins, the unexpected breaks, the non-linear jumps. You don't lose everything. You just never gain enough. And perhaps the most expensive illusion of all, believing that being good with money means never making mistakes. You avoid decisions that could go wrong. You stick to what you know. You don't want to look foolish. You don't want to regret. But this mindset keeps you small. Because every significant financial leap involves some version of not knowing, risking, and potentially being wrong. The people who build wealth aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who fail in the right direction. They make mistakes that teach, that adjust, that move them closer. They don't worship safety. They respect risk and use it. These habits don't feel like self-sabotage. They feel like wisdom, like caution, like being a smart person with money. But they're not. They're ways of buying the feeling of control without actually building power. And power is what changes your financial reality, not the feeling of safety, not the appearance of responsibility, not the illusion of certainty. Power, which leads to the next level, the habits that aren't even about behavior, but about how your brain is wired to think about money in the first place. There's a reason these habits feel so natural, so normal, so just how things are. It's because they're not random. They're built into the way your brain works. Human beings didn't evolve to build wealth. They evolved to survive, to stay safe, to belong, to avoid standing out. And in the modern financial world, those instincts work against you. One of the most powerful is loss aversion, the psychological principle that losing feels about twice as bad as winning feels good. This isn't just a quirk, it's a survival mechanism. Your brain is designed to protect what you have, not to chase what you could have. So when you face a financial decision, invest or keep cash, start something or stay put, charge more or stay reasonable, your brain leans hard toward avoiding loss, even when the potential upside is far greater than the risk. This creates a subtle but massive bias. You overprotect the known and underinvest in the possible. You hold on to money that should be working. You stay in jobs that should be left. You avoid bets that should be taken. Not because they're reckless, but because your brain treats uncertainty like danger. And in the wild, uncertainty often was danger. But in the financial world, uncertainty is where growth lives. Another deep pattern, social referencing. You don't decide what's normal in isolation. You compare yourself to the people around you. Your spending, your saving, your goals, your definition of enough, all of it is calibrated against your environment. If everyone around you lives paycheck to paycheck, that becomes your baseline. If everyone avoids talking about money, that becomes your norm. If everyone sees wealth as suspicious or out of reach, that becomes your belief. You don't notice this happening. It feels like your own thinking, but it's not. It's borrowed. And it keeps you aligned with a standard that was never designed for your success. Then there's the habit of present bias, the tendency to overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future ones. This is why you spend the money now instead of investing it. Why you choose the comfort today instead of the freedom later. Why you take the smaller amount now instead of waiting for the bigger amount later. Your brain is wired to prioritize what's in front of it. Future you is a stranger. Present you is real. And so future you keeps paying the price. This isn't a moral failure. It's a design flaw. Your brain wasn't built for compound interest. It was built for immediate threats and immediate rewards. In a world where money grows slowly and invisibly, that's a problem, because the biggest financial wins don't happen in a day, they happen in decades, and your brain doesn't naturally optimize for decades. Another layer, identity protection. You have a story about who you are, about what kind of person you are, about what's realistic for someone like you. And every financial decision gets filtered through that story. If you see yourself as not a money person, you'll avoid opportunities that require you to become one. If you see yourself as humble, you'll undercharge, underask, and undernegotiate. If you see yourself as practical, you'll dismiss anything that feels too ambitious or uncertain. You don't do this consciously. You do it to protect your sense of self, because changing your financial reality often requires changing your identity, and the brain resists that. It would rather stay broke and consistent than rich and unrecognizable. These patterns don't feel like traps. They feel like logic, like personality, like just how I am. But they're not. They're inherited survival strategies running on outdated hardware, and they keep you aligned with a version of reality that no longer serves you. The good news is this: you can't fully rewire your brain overnight, but you can build systems that work with your wiring instead of against it. You can design habits that pull you toward wealth even when your instincts pull you away. Which leads to the next question: how do you actually break these patterns without trying to just think differently or force yourself into a version of discipline that never lasts? There's a lot of advice out there that sounds good on paper but fails in real life. Just change your mindset. Wake up at 5 a.m. Stop buying coffee. Think like a rich person. The problem isn't that these are wrong. The problem is that they ignore how humans actually work. You don't change deep financial patterns by forcing yourself into a new identity overnight. You change them by designing small, repeatable shifts that slowly rewrite the code. The first step is awareness, but not the vague kind. You need specific awareness, not "I'm bad with money," not "I need to be better," not "I'll try harder." You need to see the exact moments where the old program kicks in. When do you choose comfort over leverage? When do you avoid a financial decision because it feels too much? When do you spend to feel in control instead of to build power? These aren't abstract questions. They point to real behaviors, real triggers, real patterns. And once you can name them, you can interrupt them. The second step is replacement, not elimination. Your brain doesn't respond well to stop doing this. It responds better to do this instead. So instead of trying to stop being scared of risk, you create a small, repeatable risk practice. Instead of trying to stop overspending, you design a system where money moves automatically before you can spend it. Instead of trying to think bigger, you set one slightly uncomfortable financial target and act on it consistently. You don't need a complete overhaul. You need a few key replacements. One of the most powerful is this: pay yourself first, but define yourself correctly. Most people pay everyone else first. Bills, landlord, credit cards, subscription services, lifestyle. And if anything is left, they save or invest. Flip this. Decide in advance what percentage of every dollar belongs to your future self, not your current comfort. Then automate it. Make it invisible. Make it non-negotiable. Make it the first thing that happens when money comes in. This isn't about the amount. It's about the signal. You're telling your brain, building comes before spending. Future comes before now. Power comes before comfort. And over time, that signal rewires your default settings. Another key move. Create friction for bad decisions and remove friction for good ones. If you tend to spend when you're stressed, add a 24-hour rule before any non-essential purchase over a certain amount. If you tend to avoid investing because it feels complicated, set up a simple automatic investment plan and stop giving yourself the option to opt out every month. If you tend to undervalue your work, create a script for pricing and negotiation that you use every time. No exceptions. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to make the right thing easier and the wrong thing harder. That's how systems beat willpower. Then there's the environment. You can't underestimate how much your surroundings shape your financial behavior. If everyone around you treats money as something to spend, you will too. If no one talks about investing, you won't. If wealth is seen as suspicious or unreachable, you'll subconsciously align with that. So you adjust. You find one or two people who are playing a different game. You listen to what they listen to. You read what they read. You notice how they talk about money differently. You don't need to change your entire circle. You just need to introduce new reference points, because your brain is always calibrating. The question is, to what? Another critical habit. Track progress, not perfection. Most people either ignore their numbers entirely or obsess over them in a punitive way. Neither works. Instead, create a simple, regular check-in. Once a month, same day, same time. Look at three things: income, savings/investment rate, and net worth. Not to judge yourself, not to feel bad, just to see the trend. Are you moving in the right direction, even slowly? That's enough, because what gets measured improves. Not because you're perfect, but because you're paying attention. And finally, give yourself permission to be inconsistent, as long as you're consistent about returning. You will slip. You will make decisions that don't align. You will have months where nothing seems to move. That's not failure. That's being human. The key is not to turn one off month into an off year. You come back. You restart. You don't make it dramatic. You don't turn it into a story about who you are. You just resume. Because wealth isn't built by people who never deviate. It's built by people who never quit. These aren't flashy changes. They're not inspirational. They're not overnight transformation material. But they work. Because they don't fight your nature. They work with it. And when you start stacking these small shifts, something begins to happen. Your financial reality doesn't change all at once. But your relationship to money does. You stop feeling like money is something that happens to you. You start seeing it as something you can shape. And that's when the next level becomes possible. Which leads to the final question. What does it actually feel like when you stop being poor? Not on paper, but in your identity. There's a moment that comes before the numbers change. Before the balance looks different. Before anyone else notices. It's internal. You stop feeling like money is something you chase. You start feeling like it's something you direct. You stop reacting to every bill, every expense, every unexpected cost. You start planning around them. You stop seeing wealth as something that happens to other people. You start seeing it as a trajectory you're on. This shift doesn't happen because you suddenly earn more. It happens because you stop leaking power in 100 small ways. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Does this move me toward or away from what I'm building?" You stop measuring success by what you can buy today and start measuring it by what you're creating for later. You stop trying to feel rich and start becoming wealthy. And the strange thing is, people around you might not even notice at first. Your lifestyle might look the same. Your job might look the same. Your external reality might not have changed yet. But inside, everything is different. You're no longer operating from scarcity. You're operating from strategy. You're no longer making decisions from fear. You're making them from design. You're no longer protecting what you have. You're building what you're becoming. This is the real breakthrough. Not the moment your account hits a certain number. Not the moment you buy a certain thing. Not the moment you arrive. The moment you stop identifying with the old story. The moment you realize you're not the person who can't, who doesn't, who has to wait. You're the person who builds, who adjusts, who moves. And that identity shift changes everything that comes after. Because behavior follows identity. When you see yourself as someone who builds wealth, you don't need to force yourself to save. You don't need to guilt yourself into investing. You don't need to punish yourself for mistakes. You do it because it's aligned with who you are. And when you slip, because you will. You don't turn it into a story about failure. You treat it like data, like feedback, like part of the process. You don't go back to zero. You go back to the system. This is how people break cycles that have lasted generations. Not by winning the lottery, not by getting a big break, not by finding a secret nobody else knows. By changing the way they relate to money, one small, consistent decision at a time. And the beautiful thing is, once this shift happens, it's hard to undo, because you've tasted a different version of yourself. You've felt what it's like to make decisions from power instead of fear. From clarity instead of confusion, from long-term instead of right now. And once you've felt that, the old patterns lose their grip. They might still show up, old thoughts, old urges, old fears, but they don't run the show anymore. You do. So if you're waiting for the moment when you'll feel wealthy, when the number will be high enough, when the lifestyle will look right, when the world will confirm it, understand this: that moment comes after the internal shift, not before. You don't become wealthy and then start acting like someone who builds wealth. You start acting like someone who builds wealth, and that's what makes you wealthy. The money follows the identity, not the other way around, and that's the real secret, not a hack, not a trick, not a loophole, a new operating system, one that doesn't keep you safe, one that makes you strong,